Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for the kind invitation and for being here. So I'm sorry, going to be a big change of topics because from artificial intelligence, we are going to switch to evolution. So today I'm gonna tell you of some works that have been that I've done during my PhD with Miguel Angel, and also some ongoing work that is in collaboration with Luca Peliti and with Miguel Angel always. And the idea is try to understand irreversibility in evolution. But let me start with a very general introduction. So, as you know, Darwinian evolution is it was, of course, first understood by Darwin. And Darwin, the big realization of him was that to understand that the multiple forms of life that we can see around us, in reality, come from one single ancestor. And he wrote in his notebook exactly this beautiful image with I think, and with this drawing that will represent the future idea of tree of life, okay? But from a point of view of a physicist, Darwinian evolution is, at its heart, is a stochastic process based on three forces. Reproduction, meaning that individuals reproduce themselves. Inheritance, their children will resemble their parents. And variation, that through different mechanisms, either at the genetic level or at the phenotypic level, they will have some different characteristics. Darwin realized this, even if he didn't know which were the mechanisms behind inheritance and variation. And his idea was that starting from ancestors, that could be represented here in this diagram, each new reproduction event will branch out as a genealogy, and little by little these genealogies would have diverged and created well-separated and different life forms. That is what we call species. This process, of course, as a physicist, looks like a tree or a branching process. And Ernest Haeckel in 1866 was the first one to realize the metaphor of the tree. And the idea was that then you can map all life into the different branches of this tree, plants, protists, and animals, and so on. And this idea has evolved through the course of centuries, thanks to advances in molecular genetics by Carl Woese, that was able to understand that in reality the tree of life is much bigger, and there is a third kingdom in our life that are archaea, apart from bacteria and eukarya, and even more recent techniques, here represented by the article by Banfield, were able to really understand through molecular mechanism the astonishing diversity inside bacteria and how far and how diversified they are in respect to archaea and eukaryotes. So evolution is a complex stochastic process producing trees, both at the microscopic level, that is where we have genealogies, and also on a macroscopic scale where we have divergence of species. Then, as a physicist, a natural question, and not just natural for physicists, is can we put a time arrow in evolution? Can we clearly say where is the past, what is the future, and which is the direction of evolution? Well, already one of the fathers of genetic theory of evolution, Ronald Fisher, asked this question and answered himself with what is called the Fisher fundamental theorem. As I told you, Darwin said that individuals have a property of multiply themselves, and the amount of, let's say, offsprings that will live in the environment, that could be their growth rate, for example, if we're talking about bacteria, is what is called fitness in evolution, here with F, and is one of the central quantity in evolution. And Fisher noticed that through evolution, the average fitness of the population will generally increase in time with its variance, meaning that if there is a lot of variation, natural selection will favor the fittest one, eliminate the less fit one, and increase and climb the fitness peak like a ball that goes down a potential of energy. And as, of course, you can think, this remembers a lot the second law of thermodynamics. And Fisher himself realized that. And he says, it will be noticed that the fundamental theorem proved above bears some remarkable resemblances to the second law of thermodynamics. Both are properties of population or aggregates, true irrespective of the nature of the units which compose them. And both are statistical laws. Each require the constant increase of an immeasurable quantity, in the case of entropy of a physical system, and in the other, the fitness of a biological population. And indeed, in modern day experiments with bacteria, we are able to measure fitness across the evolution of many different generations of bacteria, and you see that actually increases in time, meaning that mutants and new life forms are faster in growing and in general will be more able to reproduce and leave offsprings. But this view is not clear in reality. It's a bit controversial. And already in the 70s, many people put some questions on this Fisher fundamental theorem. Another hero of evolution, John Maynard Smith, said, Fisher fundamental theorem cannot help us to put an arrow on evolutionary time. It's a property of multiplication which enables us to put a time arrow on biological processes. Heredity and variation are reversible. Parents resemble or differ from their children as closely as children resemble from their parents. So somehow Maynard Smith seems to call for an attention. Look, yeah, okay, there is some resemble with thermodynamics, but biological individuals are not particles moving around. They are individuals that multiplicate, and this multiplication is the key that will put us some irreversibility in evolution. As a second comment, it's interesting to see what Moto Kimura, the inventor of the famous neutral evolution model, said about irreversibility in evolution. So, in the course of evolution, complicated organisms have descended from much simpler ones. If we express this complexity in terms of its improbability, defining the amount of genetic information as the negative logarithm of its probability of occurrence by chance, we may say that genetic information is increased in the course of progressive evolution, guided by natural selection of random mutations. So, Kimura is really pointing toward something that as physicists we know very well, and it's information or surprise rate. If you have some probability minus the log of it, it's a measure of the fluctuation and the surprise that you will have by sampling a process. And he's saying we should look at information and we will see how information should change across evolution to estimate its irreversibility. And as we said, for statistical physicists, this rings many bells. Because non-equilibrium statistical physics and stochastic thermodynamics in particular have given us the tools to connect irreversibility, entropy, and information flow. So by considering any general non-equilibrium system, for example, a particle in a fluid in contact with fluid bath, or some example like that, even a biological organism, we can compute, in principle, the total entropy production of the universe, that is, in this case, the system that we are considering and its environment. And this, for the second law of thermodynamics, should be positive or zero. Zero at equilibrium, positive away from equilibrium, and will somehow tell us that the system is indeed irreversible. And we can decompose each of these composition, this part of entropy, into two parts. What is called as the system entropy change of S dot, that is just as the Shannon-Gibbs entropy of a state of the system that is probabilistic, so minus dx px log of pxt, that can be thought indeed as the average of the Kimura minus log p. And the information about the time change of this object will tell us something about the work done on the system and the information that is flowing through it. Then, of course, there is the other part that is the flux. That is what is the information that goes into the environment. And this can be estimated using a statistical divergence between the path or the reverse, the direct reaction in time, and the reverse reaction in time or path. If we are at equilibrium, the time symmetry is conserved. Going from past to future is the same as going from future to past, but away from equilibrium, this divergence is positive, and we will have to produce some entropy in general. So, as you can now understand, the proposal for today is to use these statistical mechanics tools to quantify irreversibility in evolution using information flow. To do that, we're going to start from a microscopic process where we look, as Darwin, at the individuals that reproduce and which are the genealogies that are produced in that case, and the macroscopic point of view, as we do in statistical physics, where we will look at population and fluxes of probability, where we will consider a specific trait in the population or a specific characteristic, a specific gene in our population as a kind of small system, and the rest of the population as our environment. And the population will interact through some fluxes of probability given of mutation and selection. And we will try to understand how these fluxes will produce some irreversibility and the sense of a time arrow. Okay? Of course, there are some people that already thought about this in the recent years, but let's say this approach is different because it really takes into account this transition from micro to macro that is fundamental to understand the macroscopic limit of entropy production and its relation with information. So, to start, we consider the simplest process as possible that is not restrictive of our approach, but is the most intuitive one. So we consider X a continuous trait space that could be, for example, the height of people, or, for example, how long is the peak of some birds, like the one Darwin was studying in his island. And these are characteristics that can be inherited and varied through mutations. And we consider a population distribution over this trait X. And we run evolution as an algorithm, as a many-body algorithm, like a Gillespie algorithm. And each time, we are going to select two individuals, xi and x tilde j. This x tilde j is sampled at random from the population to die, to get removed from the system. The second individual, instead, is proportional to a function, the famous fitness, that is its capability of reproducing, that is giving us the time scale of the dynamics, and so it will duplicate itself like a bacterium, but its second offspring will have a small variation given by mutation, that is a kernel B beta of delta. Delta is the mutation, and I'm going to assume that this is a Gaussian centered in 0 for the typical cases. So it will be equivalent to say that there will be a new particle popping up in this new position of the new trait. And by putting everything together, we can indeed think either that this particle here was removed and this one appeared, or that this one did a jump to this position depending on the position of the other particle. And we can write down a master equation for the rates and the probabilities of the process. It will just be the rate given by the fitness times the mutation kernel and the random depth, and it would be a master equation for many processes, many individuals. That is what we do in statistical physics. Yet, big individuals is difficult to handle, so we do a thermodynamic limit where we do an infinite size limit, and we end up with a macroscopic description where now our object is a density phi, that is density of individuals with a certain trait X. And this will evolve in time following this equation that is called generalized Cauchy-Moore equation, where the fitness of the population X will gives you some reproduction, but the total phi will increase if the single trait X evolves and reproduce faster than the average of the population, that is this F bar. And then you will have a part that it is a diffusion in this trait space that will model mutation, where you have proportional to fitness because mutation happens when you reproduce, and this object here that are the kernel, the moments of the mutation kernel beta. Okay, this is the framework that I'm going to use. And to study some concrete example, I need to specify some fitness or how the population reproduces itself. What I'm going to consider is a so-called growth competition model, saying that my fitness is the combination of how much do I grow, that is K, depending on my trait, and minus how much I compete with some other trait Y, because we eat similar resources, for example, or something like that. And my growth rate will be a Gaussian centered in 0 with a certain amplitude sigma square, sigma k. And the competition will be also Gaussian centered in 0 with the variable given by the distance between the two traits, meaning that similar traits compete a lot, different traits do not compete much, and also with certain width. And by integrating this over the full population, you will have the typical fitness of an individual with trait X. Okay? So once we have this, we can study what's going on, and we can do what we like in physics, that is an evolutionary phase diagram. The control parameter now are the amplitude of the competition and the amplitude of the growth rate. And you see that we have a very simple phase diagram that if the competition is larger than the carrying capacity that you can see here, because the green one is the competition, the black one is the growth rate, and you see that the red one is our fitness. What you see, there's a peak, and the population by mutation will tend to reach this peak little by little, and reach it at the end of a time in a stationary state. But keep an eye on the thing that, of course, this fitness now it's time dependent because it depends on the interaction with the other particles. So it's a kind of temporary changing landscape or Hamiltonian, if you want to think at Landau theory. And this can be seen also in stochastic simulation of our many-body system. This is a case in which somehow competition is not so strong and you can reach the top place where you eat all the resources or where the environment is the best and you don't care much about competition. On the other hand, if we are on the other side of the diagram, something interesting happens, or a speciation event, but a different speciation than the one of Beatrice. What's going on here? If the competition is smaller than the growth, the total fitness, red curve here, it has a different shape. You see that actually when the evolution starts, the population is really nearby a minimum that it does not like at all, and you have a maximum on the right. And of course, for selection, you want to reach this maximum because you want to be the best. And you slowly try to move away from this minimum, but there is but it's coming with you, and at some point you're going to fall into this minimum. And when you fall into this minimum, you see two maxima on the right and on the left, and the population branches into two to reach these two maxima at the end of the simulation, as you can see here. And of course, as a physicist, this will remember a symmetry breaking phase transition in Landau theory, and one can actually do the calculation in a similar way, where instead of having an Hamiltonian, we are looking at this fitness landscape that is changing in time and doing a kind of phi-4 theory. And if you want, I can tell more about this. But let me go straight to the point. Now that we understand the phenomenology, we want to understand if it's irreversible and how much it is irreversible. To do that, as we said, we need to apply statistical physics away from equilibrium. Meaning that if we start from our microscopic description of particles moving around or individually reproducing, I want to understand if the tail balance is broken. Meaning that if I have this state, I have the red particle and the green one, I kill the green one and the red one reproduces, and I go to this other state, what I have the two red ones. To come back to the original one, I will have to kill the mutant and reproduce back what has been killed. If the probability of these two transitions are not equal, the tail balance is broken, you're away from equilibrium, and the system is irreversible. And this is, of course, the case in a system like the one that you've seen, when you kill something that is far away from you, and the mutation is not strong enough to reproduce such a big variation. And by doing that, we can calculate the entropy production of this many-body system, again, by decomposing into the change of the system entropy. That will be the entropy of the probability of the master equation, where you take into account all the individuals. And the flux, that will be, again, the statistical divergence between the directed and the reverse process. But again, this many-body system is a mess, and we want to understand what's going on in our macroscopic system. And to do that, we do again an infinite limit. What's the picture here? So now I can interpret in an easy way this S dot and S dot flux. For example, during the dynamics, if S dot is positive, is meaning that the distribution is expanding, as you can see in the cartoon, and instead the S flux will measure how each part of the distribution is exchanging probability with the rest. And when I'm going to reach a stationary state, the distribution is not going to change anymore. I will have just my flux part, and then will be the balance between selection, that is trying to maximize fitness and bring people to the peak of the distribution, and mutation that are pushing them away from it. And in this case, I can look at indeed what Kimura was suggesting, the entropy rate or the information rate of minus, that is minus log the density of individuals with a certain trait X. I can look at its change in time, and I can decouple it into two parts, one done by selection and one by mutation. You see that the selection part has a very interesting structure, that is the covariance that I represent here as sigma of the fitness function, that is what it's making me reproducing, with the small s, the information rate or the surprise rate here, saying that I will have some information flux depending on the covariance between fitness and the information. On the other hand, the part of mutation will be similar to what we have in stochastic processes, will be the average, that is this bar here, of the square of the velocity of the current of mutation, meaning that mutation is like a diffusion, it will produce a current, I take the square of this object, I normalize it, and this is what's gonna tell me how much, let's say, I dissipate due to mutation. But it's not the end of the story, because we know that at stationary state, the sum of these two objects needs to go to 0, and I will have just a third one, that is what we call the flux, that is how information circulates into the system. And this is very interesting. It has a term that goes 1 over sigma square, where sigma square is the typical amplitude of mutation that I have when I reproduce. And I will have the change in the variance of the distribution, that is sigma, plus the difference between the distribution variance and the mutational variance here, multiplied for the total fitness. So this is telling me that my system has a flux of entropy because it moves its variance, either restrict or increase, like an expansion, and then in relation to the typical mutational amplitude. And we're going to see an example what is the meaning of this part. For example, let's go back to our case of one peak distribution where you are very able to climb your fitness landscape. If I plot my entropy flux, the red one, you see that it goes from a very small value to a value that reaches quite a high plateau, that is 10 to the second, more or less to the 2, more or less when the particle or the population is able to reach the peak of the distribution. And if you look at the mutational and the selective part, here in orange and in blue, you see that the mutational one is positive, as expected, but decays. And the selective one goes to a negative value. So this gives us something that is very fascinating, meaning that mutation tends to increase the entropy and produce information, while selection reduces the information in your system, and these two effects balance each other. but yet I have still some irreversibility because I have this last part here. And what is this last part measuring? Well, here we have in black the distribution of trait at the stationary state. So there is a peak and there is a certain variance given by mutation. If you look at how selection works, that is this blue line, you will see that it's positive in the center, meaning that individuals are attracted from the region, and negative in the tail, meaning that they are removed because they are not fit at all. On the other hand, the mutation, you see that has this sinusoidal shape that is basically bringing individuals away from where they are. And this is why you have irreversibility. Even if the currents of mutation and selection balance each other, they are very different in nature. And this will create irreversibility, where you have that fit individual on the top will mutate away at some point, and selection is going to remove them, and you have this circulation of information through the system. That is what actually Kimura called mutational or substitutional load. That is, if you want, the price that you pay to have mutation, that is, you're going to select unfit individual. Finally, if we look at the speciation event, we have something that is glorious, really. The irreversibility picks up of the value that is 2 orders of magnitude higher. You reach a value of 10 to the 4, and kind of makes sense because you're producing 2 different species, and reaches a plateau more or less when the distribution splits into 2. Now, again, I can look at the different contributions. The one of selection, that is the covariance between the fitness and the information or the surprise rate of the distribution, at the start is positive, and it peaks at a time that coincides when the speciation events occurs, and then decays to a negative value that it reaches a stationary state. This is telling us that before, when the distribution is trying to reach the maximum of the fitness and escape from the minimum, selection is producing new information. This is what is called is divergent evolution. And when then the selection is gone and you just divide, it's just removing unfit individuals and it's going back to a negative value. While, as we said again, the mutational part is always positive and decays to a very small value. So we see that we have also reversibility from speciation because we now produce 2 species, and of course it's extremely unlikely to go back to the 1 species case. And this is exactly what is measured by this term here. The variance of the distribution will be proportional to the distance in trait of these 2 species. That is much more than what you can occur with a single jump of mutation, because there is evolutionary history behind that, meaning you cannot with one mutation pass from the parrot to the eagle, okay? And this is the information that they are accumulating, and the time scale of the information that they are accumulating is given by the average fitness and the sigma squared. To close and to go a bit more deep into the real meaning, I think, of this object, we have to go back and connect this microscopic and macroscopic scale. So why in the deep sense evolution is irreversible? Because even if we have a trait distribution that is constant in time and nothing changes from someone that looks from far away, if you zoom in, individuals are constantly being killed, reproduce, and mutate. And this produces a genealogy or a phylogenetic tree that you can see depicted here that is balancing at each time step to keep the distribution constant, but the individuals are constantly dying in these branches or producing new ones. So there is an irreversibility of the information flow here, because information is constantly removed because you kill some individuals and reinserted in some other place. So there is a copy and destroying of information. And this, as we said, will give us a balance of fluxes at the macroscopic level that we have described. And also, finally, we can see something interesting to see how this entropy production goes as function of the mutational amplitude. You see that goes as 1 over it, and you have 2 branches. One with mutation is very low and irreversibility is very high, because selection is strong and mutation cannot go back in time. and reintroduce individuals that has been killed. While when mutation is very big, it's winning over selection, and you will have kind of a blob of not very fit traits that are living one with the other. With that, I'm going to conclude by saying that evolution is an intrinsic, out of equilibrium, irreversible process emerging from the balance of selection and mutation, that the entropy production quantifies the temporal asymmetry of information flux along this genealogical tree, and it shows particular non-monotonic dynamics that reflects the different evolutionary phases, convergence and speciation. And with this, I want to thank my collaborators, Luca Peliti and Miguel Angel Munoz. If you want to read more, we have a first paper on, say, the evolutionary phase part in PRR, and we are writing the new entropy production part. And I want to thank you for the attention and for the kind invitation. And if I can, just 1 minute for an advertisement. So if there are students that are interested in this theme of biophysics, ecology, and evolution, in the French Pyrenees, we organize in July a very interesting school of 1 week on unifying mathematical models of biodiversity, where using techniques from stochastic processes, dynamical systems, and disorder system, we're going to introduce what does it mean to do community ecology, how do ecosystems are so diverse, how do species interact, and how do they respond to changes. And it's a beautiful situation where with many different teachers and with a lot of activity in nature that complement the academic part. So thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Matteo, for the seminar and for the advertisement. Please question if there are.
Well, I have a question.
There is also Irene,
an hand raised by
just because you are a co-author, Miguel. So.
No, that's my question. So I like very much what you told us, and I ask you, when are you going to finish the draft?
Soon.
This is a private question, so.
Okay, sorry.
No, I'm joking. So.
Yes. So.
I have two questions. If when it's my turn.
Please, I'm very happy.
Yeah,
okay.
You can.
Okay, the first question is related to whether there is some simple experiment, maybe on bacteria, where you can test these expressions, right? Because in principle, it should be possible to measure the amplitude of mutation and selection in bacteria under controlled conditions. So that was my first question. And the second question is the following. So it's very clear from your talk that the driving force of irreversibility is the difference between selection and mutation, and the fact that the fitness selection acts upon the fitness. So if there is a maximum in the fitness, you want to go there. So it's not just a random motion in the phase of your genotype. But if the fitness landscape is very heterogeneous, so that you have maybe many minima, would that possibly imply that on larger time scales you recover some sort of reversible dynamics? I mean, when you have, if you have many maxima in the fitness, it's true that on short time scale you would go to one maximum, but maybe waiting more, there will be other which are equivalent statistically. So would that make a difference? Okay.
Okay. So I start from the second question, if you allow me. So I will go back to share my screen. So it's not just fitness that is if you want, giving you the irreversible. So I think here we have to. And it's, let's say, all the part that is under the carpet, and I'm finishing to write for for answering to Miguel Angel, is that you can think about two types of irreversibility, right? So that do not always coincide. One is, if you want, the surprise of irreversibility of the dynamics, meaning that Here I've considered infinite populations, but if you have a dynamic that is more complex, given also with fluctuation at the finite size level, you will have irreversibility given by the fact that there will be a typical state of the population. There will be, if you want, the deterministic one, and then the average one, and then the fluctuations across trajectories or samples, noise, and all of this. This we are not covering it, and it's a thing that, if you want, this you are referring to. So in that sense, I think that if the dynamics is very complex, you maybe could recover some kind of irreversibility at the level of the dynamics. But the central point here, if you wanted, is the difference between all the previous approaches, is that the reversibility is not coming only from the fact that you have a typical configuration of your entire population, but that you have a typical configuration of individuals, meaning that minus log phi is telling you that you have an irreversibility just because you are not all in the peak. As soon as you have some variants and some mutants along the peak, you will have always some irreversible part, because at the microscopic way you have this irreversibility. So I would say that if you want, at the macroscopic population level, probably you can recover something, while on the macroscopic level, really looking at what's happening inside a single distribution, this is not the case. I don't want to extend myself, but given that, I mean, I know that we are talking about also that the topics of disorder system, somehow there is the work by Pellitti and Derrida that understood that if you want, you have two kind of averages in this process. An average of the stochasticity or the dynamics, that is like taking an average of over the disorder, okay, and then you have an average of the population, of what are doing the individual into the populations. And these two different averages give you two different irreversibility. One is possible, it goes away, while the other will always be there. Okay, I don't know if I answered in this case what you are saying, what you asked. And I also would say that probably if you have these many, it's an interesting question. If probably you have these many attractor case, you will have many branches, and they will be probably very bigly irreversible, unless if you have like a stochastic fluctuation, you could have an event like this where maybe one branch dies and you come back to the initial state. That maybe is what you were asking, and that could happen, but that point will still be irreversible for this, if you want, individual level irreversibility. Regarding experiments, it's a very nice, interesting question. The thing is that, well, it's a thing that I'm reflecting on it. It's difficult, right? In a sense that you need to know the mutational amplitude of your system. That is not always the case. And but neutral, for example, evolution, there you could have a chance, because you have maybe some 1 point mutation on some space, and maybe you could be able to reconstruct it. Or another way, I think that it's an open question for me, is whether you can do it by looking at phylogenies, because somehow, if you want, the quantity of irreversibility here has to do with how is the phylogenetic tree structured. And if you have neutral processes or mutation selection balance or speciation, the distribution of your trees will be much different. And in that case, I think you, by looking maybe at the properties of the tree, you will maybe be able to estimate the entropy production somehow. But maybe also Luca could say something. I don't know, they were looking at about these properties of the trees and also in some data. So could be done. Maybe also the experiment that I was telling you at the start with the decrease of fitness, maybe a small part of it could be used, but it should be for sure a long work. But I'm very interested in this question, let's say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Luca. No comment. Okay. Other questions or comments?
No, I would like to make a comment because so what we did, we followed an idea by Husserl and Leibler, and we compared the genealogies, say the process of genealogies with the reverse process. And this is a way, if you have data on the genealogies, so you can estimate the fitness, which is not trivial. So in this case, you use irreversibility to extract information about the dynamics of the population.
So you compute directly the probability on the tree. It's not that you try to infer a model and then from the model.
No. It's from the statistics of genealogies. So you can, if you are given the genealogies, and that is the point, the hard part. But if you're given that, you have two different statistics. So one is looking forward, so at each branching, and the other one looking backwards. So you climbing up the genealogy is called the coalescent. And you compare the two statistics and you have information about the fitness, which is pretty obvious if you think about it.
But yes, I think that could be a way of estimating the irreversibility, or if not, as you say, maybe trying to have an estimation about fitness differences in the population and the mutational amplitude, but you need a very, let's say,
very
fine detail. Or either you look at speciation, and if you look at, if there is a way, maybe if I give you the tree of animals, and then look about how fast they speciate and all of this, maybe that would be probably an easy way of estimating this irreversibility and this information flow.